What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Odd Shopper channel. Today, we're talking some college basketball. It is March the 14th, Thursday of conference tournament week. All the major conference tournaments are underway, and we finally start to get some of the better teams playing. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you by BetMGM. They have a limited time offer, and I've been saying limited time for a while now. This actually ends tomorrow. What the deal is, you'll go to the link below for BetMGM. It's in the description. Click that, make your first deposit of at least $5. Turn that around, $5 wager on any team, total, market, whatever you want. Whether the bet wins or loses, you get $150 in the form of bonus bets. If you're in North Carolina, that is $200. Who wouldn't want an extra $150 in the account for March Madness or the end of these conference tournaments as they arise? This is for legal states with the exception of New York, Puerto Rico, and Nevada. You must be 21 or older to play in most areas. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. Again, take advantage of this. It's basically the last day. This is going to end tomorrow with BetMGM, and thank you to this promo that they've been running throughout most of the conference tournament weekend prior to that. Big boost for those of you that have taken advantage. All right. Yeah, yesterday was largely forgettable. Had some pretty bad showings from teams that expected a lot out of Virginia Tech. And I mean, some of these, it's just like the closing line value has not been working in some of these spots. And we always say closing line value doesn't feed your family. So it's frustrating to get Virginia Tech -3. They close -4, lose outright. Frustrating on the Butler side, a game that I think they should have won against Xavier. Texas closes -5, had that at 4.5. That was against Kansas State. They lose outright. And there were a couple other ones. Lehigh, same thing. Arkansas, Vanderbilt got a barely lost in that game. And honestly, Arkansas probably should have lost by more. They were down big to Vanderbilt in the first half, claw their way back into OT, and win the game by 5, had 5.5. A little frustrating there. And then Washington shooting the lights out from 3 early in the game, could not keep that up against USC in the second half. So a little frustrating, but we'll spin this forward as we continue through the week of conference tournaments. It's a greasier slate, but I think there's maybe some actionable takes we can get in the bigger games, which we'll talk about at the end of the show. As we start things off, it's going to be some smaller conferences, and then we'll work our way towards some of the bigger games. First up, we have Bethune-Cookman taking on Southern. This is a game where you can get Southern -2. Still, this is probably going to move through 2 or 3 in the coming hours. You have one stark advantage on the Southern side. It's their defense, which should be able to overwhelm Bethune-Cookman in this game. It's 121 to 254, and this team has some other advantages. Rebounding shouldn't be too big of an advantage on either side. Neither team plays a big lineup. We're talking two teams outside the top 280 in effective height. Effective field goal percentage also favors Southern, even though they're at a slight disadvantage in offense. This team is 221 shooting, and Bethune-Cookman is 295. So some of where Bethune-Cookman is able to do some things is just on the offensive glass. They're 144th, which is a slight advantage over Southern. But again, we're talking really slight advantages both directions. That shooting advantage, Southern's direction, is pretty stark. And one thing, these two teams do pressure a lot on defense. 2 top 11 teams in turnovers forced. And then both of these teams are outside the top 330 in turnovers committed. So don't be surprised if this is a sloppy game. But right away, Southern is a team that should be taking some money throughout the day. Both these teams also get in foul trouble outside the top 342 in fouls committed. So they have similar profiles, but you have one team that's just excellent on defense and the other team lackluster really across the board in Bethune-Cookman. So that's where we will start things off on this side with a greasier game. Next up, we'll continue this trend. We have Delaware State taking on South Carolina State, another one expecting to move. That's the reason I put a lot of these greasier games, if you will, at the top of the show. Delaware State, they're a little imbalanced. Much better on defense, 186 compared to their 338th ranked offense. South Carolina State, this team pretty balanced across the board, 290th to 245. But where I think we really want to look is an over here, 135. This is basically a pair of teams that are top 100 in pace. Delaware State is 89th, and South Carolina State is 101. These are two teams that both will play with pace. And this game has a chance to get up and down if we get any sort of efficiency whatsoever. Now, in previous renditions of this game, it hasn't always been pretty. Last time they played, this ended up scoring 69-62. So you can see not exactly a game that had a lot of points. And the first time these teams matched up, it was actually 66-64. So scoring has been a bit of an issue in this game, but it largely just comes down to efficiency. And my model made this over. The industry model is the same thing. I think there's a chance we see a different outcome in this contest as long as we get some scoring. As far as where these two teams succeed, you have a much taller team in Delaware State. They should try to win through the inside. That's where South Carolina State's also very weak on defense. They're 316th defending the interior. So even though they're 245th, a decent defensive metric, very, very bad at defending the inside. And where they excel is against guards. But unfortunately for Delaware State, they can't shoot threes. So you kind of have a tailor-made matchup for Delaware State to score inside over South Carolina State, assuming they can use their height advantage. It's interesting. South Carolina State's actually the better rebounding team, despite coming in at a height disadvantage. Not sure what to make of that. But then on the South Carolina State side, this team is better at shooting threes compared to playing on the inside. Makes sense with a smaller lineup. They're not great at shooting threes, 266 in three-point percentage, but Delaware State is 321 defending that area of the court. That's another spot where we should be able to get some opportunities. And then both these teams are good on the offensive glass. South Carolina State really attacks this. They need to because they're not a great shooting team. 7th in the country in offensive rebounds. Delaware State is 74, so they also get second chance opportunities. We talk about this a lot. Don't love teams that need a couple things to go right to score. You'd rather teams just make their shots right away. But if your team is bad at shooting, at least you'd want them to be good at offensive rebounding, good on the glass. Both these teams also generate a lot of turnovers. Hopefully that can lead to some points in transition. Both teams also turn the ball over a ton. It's similar to the first matchup where we have two top 21 teams in turnovers forced, two teams outside the top 343 in turnovers committed, which could be another avenue to scoring in this Delaware State, South Carolina State game. Next up, we're going to keep the same vein. Morgan State takes on Howard. This is one where I think there's a couple things worth mentioning. I'm interested in the Morgan State side, but I think a total is also pretty interesting here at 146. The pace is just fine. When you look at this game, 143 on Howard, 40 on Morgan. Both teams play fast. And these are actually some teams with some decent players overall when you look at the profile. The reason I also am interested in Howard over Morgan State is Winston Tabbs has been out. Oh, and I should have mentioned this in the previous game. The previous two games with Southern, their best player, they have the three best players in the team, and Bethune-Cookman's best player, Zion Harmon's been out. So sorry, I missed that note. But Southern, three best players, Bethune-Cookman out, their best player. That's another reason. But anyway, on this Howard side against Morgan State, Winston Tabbs has been out. He's their leading scorer. He's not the most efficient player, but this is a guy that's played at high major programs. He's not going to play in the tournament. This is one that has some pretty drastic differences when you look at my model, when you look at the industry models like KenPom, Bartorvik. A lot of them are closer to 155. So 146 is a pretty solid number here. But even without Tabbs, like 10 points off that projection doesn't make a lot of sense to me. When you dive in and look at how these teams actually match up and score against each other, yeah, Morgan State's not great on offense, but Howard is pretty decent. They're 122nd in effective field goal. This team is 26th in three-point percentage. They shoot a ton of threes too. And Morgan State is 259 defending the three. So that's an area where they should be able to have some success. And then similar to the previous matchup, Morgan State plays a far taller lineup than Howard. 121 to 259 in effective height. Should give them some advantages inside. Howard's not great at defending the interior, 212. This is another interesting spot where Howard actually has a rebounding advantage, but it's not because of their height. They just attack the offensive glass. 55th in offensive rebounding. So there are opportunities to score in this game as well, not just because of pace, but two teams that should have advantages over the opposing team's defense. Howard from three, Morgan State on the inside, and then pace just really lines up for the over here. The secondary play would be Howard minus the 5 with Winston Tabbs expected to miss this game again. Next up, we'll remain in some mid-majors, low majors. Jackson State takes on Texas Southern. We're looking at an under in this game. And you can see right away, pacing sets up towards this. We have two teams that have been pretty slow. Jackson State 97th. We'll get to that in a second. Texas Southern 155th. The biggest thing here is the pace change for Jackson State. In the last 6 weeks, they've dropped from a top 100 team in pace to 239th. They're over 100 spots lower, over 140 spots lower from their year-long pace, dropping down to their last 6 weeks in conference play. And then as far as some of the efficiency stuff goes on offense, I'm not expecting the most efficient game. Both these teams are awful on offense. Jackson State 269, Texas Southern 315. The defense for Texas Southern is also much better. They're 185th in overall defensive efficiency. And then unlike previous games, we sort of have the strength of these teams on defense matching up with the strength on offense. So Jackson State, they largely score from three, much better from three, 228 to 316. That's where we have some pretty good defense from Texas Southern. They're 115th defending that area of the floor. And on the other side, this Texas Southern team, for as good as they've been on offense in spurts, they don't shoot. They're 320th in effective field goal, 318th on the inside, 297th from three. Just no scoring whatsoever from this team. So with the Jackson State team playing much slower in terms of pace, this is one I think we can look at towards the under at 141 in this spot. Next up, we head to Tulane taking on North Texas. Spot where North Texas -5. This has been one that's largely been affected by injuries. You can get some value on the North Texas side really anytime they touch the floor right now because Buggs and Jones have missed a large stretch of this season. They're both back for this team, which is telling. Offensive advantage actually lies with North Texas, which is a bit surprising. They play extremely slow, and they're not the most efficient team on offense. But fortunately for them, Buggs and Jones are, I think, their two most efficient offensive players, awesome three-point shooters. And then even with the absences, this team has been elite on defense, 36th, and they still have some meat left on the bone because of the injuries to these players. As far as shooting, the effective field goal gap is pretty wide. It's 42 to 160. Again, I think getting Jones and Buggs back helps this a lot. And this North Texas team defends everywhere that Tulane excels. For some reason, Tulane is much better scoring inside. They're 28th, but they play a shorter lineup. They're 304th in effective height. This team is tiny. They don't shoot threes all that well. They're decent at this area of the floor, but this is a spot where North Texas has a drastic advantage. They're 21st in three-point shooting. Tulane is 222nd defending. And then, of course, when you're playing basically a lineup that is tiny, 304th in effective height, you're going to have other disadvantages regularly, and Tulane has that on the glass here, both just total rebounds, offensive rebounds, really across the board. The only big worry for me in this game is North Texas's propensity to foul. Fortunately for them, I do think the injuries that they've sustained throughout the year has allowed them to develop some depth. So I'm not as worried about this. Tulane does generate a fair amount of fouls, and Texas will get in foul trouble a lot, but it's a spot where Tulane, I don't know if they can actually handle the depth that North Texas has been able to cultivate this year. So we'll back North Texas -5. Tulsa takes on East Carolina. Another one where looking largely just towards an under here. And I think this is a number that's pretty decent. Right away, this game sets up, I think, with some pretty solid numbers towards the under. Tulsa does play fast. They're 47th in pace, but East Carolina plays at the 318th ranked pace. That should be able to slow this down a fair amount in this game. Neither team plays well on offense. You can see their two teams imbalanced, with defense being the strength. Effective field goal numbers kind of mirror this. Tulsa's 205 in effective field goal. East Carolina's even worse at 292. Both teams sort of excelling where the opposing team defends, or excelling on defense where the opposing team scores. It's a decent matchup, I think, for Tulsa just on paper. They're a slightly taller team that's not influenced in rebounding, but they do score a little more inside. So if you're looking at a side, Tulsa's the way to go. But overall, these teams, you're going to see them play slow, especially with East Carolina driving pace. You're going to see them struggle to shoot the ball. Neither of them have been able to do this all season long. But right away, I think you can look towards the under in this game with pace projected to come in quite slow in this matchup. Also, sort of talking myself into a Tulsa side. We'll cross-reference some injuries as we get off the show here and make sure this makes sense. But under 141, expecting this to move through 140 throughout the day. One that has not moved in my favor, we've gotten some closing line value on most of these. This is one where you can get a better number now. It's Niagara taking on Marist, and Marist opened as a pick'em. That's the number that I took, and I have no problem with, but if you can grab the +1, you might as well. Marist is a better team. Both teams are bad. We're talking low major schools, but Marist, the only top 100 metric belongs to them. It's their defense. They're 84th in the country in total defensive efficiency. And I don't think the offensive gap is maybe as wide as some people might see on the screen with total offensive efficiency. Marist is still 180th in effective field goal. It's not terrible. It's about middle of the pack. Niagara's better, 118th. But you look on defense and where these two teams excel. Niagara's basically a three-point shooting team. They're 53rd in three-point percentage. Marist is 76th defending that area. And then for all the struggles Marist has on offense, they're actually not that bad shooting threes, 110. And Niagara's terrible defending that area of the floor. They're 268th. From there, you have to worry about turnovers with Marist, 259 and turnovers committed. Fortunately for them, Niagara never generates turnovers. They're 246th. And it's the exact opposite when Niagara has the ball. They're 180th in turnovers committed, which isn't great, about middle of the pack. But Marist is 26th in turnovers forced. This team does generate a ton of turnovers. So they have paths to winning not just through their defense. Turnovers forced, I guess that's a component in defense, but they also don't shoot the three all that poorly considering they're a 321 ranking on the offensive side. So we'll back at Marist plus the 1 in this spot. And we'll close things up with Western Kentucky taking on New Mexico State. This is one with a spread of 6.5. And I think it's going to move through 7. So that's something at least worth mentioning. But I think it's one that's going to be one we can take probably throughout the day. Overall, Western Kentucky plays they have a better lineup. They've been injured throughout the year. They got back Lander. They got back Rodney Howard. These are 2 Power 5 transfers that play for this team. And they should be able to have advantages across the board if they can find any shooting. The big problem with this team has been on offense. They're excellent on defense, 134. Fortunately for them in this matchup, New Mexico State doesn't score either. They're 289th. So some of the woes Western Kentucky's had shooting, they should be able to win a greasier game if this comes down to it. Effective field goal percentage, Western Kentucky, they're 124. New Mexico State is 316. Western Kentucky can score inside. They play the slightly taller lineup. They're 112th in interior scoring. From 3, they do struggle, 174, but fortunately, New Mexico State 230th in three-point defense. So some potential avenues for success there. The much better rebounding team, and it's not just on the offensive side. They're 91 to 294 in total rebounds. And a lot of that comes on defense. Western Kentucky is only 177th in offensive rebounding. They also force way more turnovers, 95th in turnovers forced. New Mexico State 246th. So this is one I do think we should be looking at. And this number, a lot of you may be thinking it's gone. It's still available. I'll bring you to the odd shopper screen because you can't actually find this. I'm seeing 6.5 still left on the board. So ignore some of the other games I have up. We'll talk about those in a second. But you can see 1 trailing 6.5. This is available at FanDuel. It is juiced a little bit to the -120. But this is basically the tool I want to highlight. I mean, this -6.5 is key. We've seen already. I've lost on the hook, I think 3 times in the last 2 days. I live in Wisconsin, of course, so I don't have access to as many books as those of you in legal states. But you can actually customize this for the state you live in. You can customize it if you only play on a few books. It's a highly customizable tool, and it helps you find the best place to make these wagers. And if my 3 losses based on these numbers aren't evidence, this does make a huge difference to your bottom line at the end of the day. But the package that's available now has sorry, I realized I hadn't clicked this on the screen. Here we go. Now you can see the -126.5 on FanDuel. But anyway, the package that's available has our market-based approach for all the sports, not just college basketball, NBA, player props, NHL, whatever you want to play, helps you identify these bets. But our Discord's included. The college basketball Discord is very active this time of year. I'm in there. Ben's in there. we're talking about all these picks, how we're using the tools and how you can use them. It's only $14.95 for a week, $49.95 for a month. So, I mean, this is like the perfect opportunity to take advantage of this. Even if you just want it for the first weekend of March Madness to try it out, you can absolutely do that. And it's not a long-term commitment. So check it out. The link's below. I use it. Ben uses it. Our entire team uses it, and it's extremely worthwhile. So I live in Wisconsin, don't have access to all these books. There's a couple I want to talk about if you do have access and can get the best lines. One is Wisconsin taking on Maryland. There's a 2.5. It's the lone 2.5 in the market, and it's available at BetMGM. I only have 3.5s, which is kind of crazy because most of them are sitting at 3. But Wisconsin minus 2.5 is a value. This one is a little tough to stomach. If you've bet Wisconsin at all this year, you understand this. They've won a lot of games they shouldn't have, and they've lost a lot of games they should have won. This kind of falls into the former category against Maryland, but they have massive advantages in this game. Wisconsin, the far better scoring team. Maryland just cannot score. Wisconsin's 105th in effective field goal. Maryland is 319th. Wisconsin also has bodies, and they're healthy now. Blackwell, he's been playing really well for this team, and he's actually emerged as their best three-point shooter. As long as you can defend Maryland, you should be able to win games. Their only area of success has been inside, and they're still 228th scoring from that area of the floor. Julian Reese has been banged up for this Maryland team. So there's avenues to success. And this Maryland team is constantly in foul trouble. They're 270th in fouls committed. That's been a huge problem for their entire front court, and Wisconsin's 17th at generating fouls. The same margin exists for turnovers, and you could see this, the shooting numbers really just across the board. 176 to 352. On the inside, 79 to 228. Wisconsin with the 2.5 should be a pretty solid number to back here. A couple others, I do think Colorado State, if you can grab a 4, is pretty solid. There's one available in the market. That is courtesy of Fliff, one I'm not too familiar with, but you can also find 3.5s without any juice. For reference, there's one right here on Bet Rivers. And then we have Boston College. There's a 5 out there, which I'm interested in as well at DraftKings. So those two matchups, Colorado State's lost a couple. One game was not so close, but the second one, the one they most recently played, pretty close against Nevada. We know about Blackshear's injury. He's returned. We're not sure on the full health status for him, but just very close metrics across the board. Offense, 41 for Nevada, Colorado State, 48th. Defense, 31 for Nevada, Colorado State, 37th. The better shooting team overall is Colorado State, 25 to 58. And the only real thing I'm worried about with Nevada is their height advantage. They might be able to score on the inside against Colorado State, who plays a small lineup, 317th. But this number, I think, is important. And if you can find a dog price with Colorado State, that makes some sense. And then as far as the last one goes, Boston College, they're fresh off a win over Clemson. It's just this Virginia team is basically in disarray, cannot score whatsoever, and they've been atrocious away from their home building. It's a neutral floor here. On offense, they are 234th in effective field goal percentage, 304th in 2-point, and from 3, they're actually pretty decent. They're 35th, but for whatever reason, they're 299th in 3-point attempts. This is adjusted for pace. So yeah, we know they're the slowest team in the country behind North Texas, but even though they shoot threes decently, this team doesn't shoot them ever. They, for whatever reason, are unable to identify their own strengths. I'm not sure why. But Boston College, they're a team that has the taller lineup, 67th in effective height. They win largely through Quinton Post. That's the area of the floor where Virginia is slightly weaker on defense. They play a smaller lineup. They're 108th in effective height. You should be able to have some advantages Boston College direction inside, and then rebounding. A lot of the ancillary stuff also favors them. Also, they're not in foul trouble very often for playing tall. 100th in fouls committed, and Virginia never generates them anyway. They're 353. So that'll do it for us today. This is just kind of how I'm using OddsShopper, trying to find also where lines are moving. All this available, link below. If you have questions on any of these games, comments, let me know. I'm available on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. DMs are open, so feel free to reach out. But until next time, good luck, everyone. We'll see you later.